A billionaire left his 9-month pregnant woman standing in the rain to teach her a lesson.
I am so
But his
scared.
driver, a secret billionaire, truly loved her. Hi, my beautiful family. May the Almighty bless every woman with radiant health, endless peace, and a heart overflowing with love. May He lift the mothers who carry the weight of families, the sisters who protect with quiet strength, the wives who stand as pillars of sacrifice, and the daughters who bring laughter and light to every home. May no woman in this family ever walk in pain, for in God's eyes she is the crown of creation and the heartbeat of life. My precious family, I need your help. My channel is dying, and I will never force you. But if this message touches you, please like this video and share it with at least 5 friends. We are one family and we help each other. Your small act of love gives my work life, keeps our stories alive, and helps me keep serving you with all my heart. If your heart is true, right, present. If your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. Monica Sinclair Clark possessed the kind of beauty that stopped conversations mid-sentence, and the kind of intelligence that restarted them with trembling reverence. But tonight, she felt like a prize horse being paraded before potential buyers. The crystal chandelier cast diamond patterns across the marble floor of Andrew Clark's Fifth Avenue mansion, each beam of light worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Manhattan's elite moved through the opulent rooms like sharks in designer clothing, their conversations a delicate dance of power, influence, and barely concealed greed. The charity gala was the social event of the season, but Monica knew the truth behind the glittering facade. It was Andrew's stage, and she was his most prized possession on display. At 9 months pregnant, Monica moved with the careful grace of a queen navigating treacherous waters. Her dark skin glowed against the deep emerald of her custom Valentino gown, the fabric flowing around her swollen belly like liquid silk. She had chosen the dress deliberately, bold, beautiful, and impossible to ignore. If Andrew insisted on showing her off like a trophy, she would ensure that trophy blazed with her own fire. Mrs. Clark, your work on the domestic violence legislation has been absolutely revolutionary. Senator Patricia Williams gushed, her eyes bright with genuine admiration. The legal protections you crafted have already saved dozens of lives. Monica's smile was radiant despite her exhaustion. Thank you, Senator. I believe the law should be a shield for the vulnerable, not a sword for the powerful. She felt her daughter kick restlessly inside her, as if the baby could sense the tension that had been building all evening. From across the room, Andrew watched his wife command attention with growing irritation. Supreme Court Justice Robert Chen hung on her every word as she explained constitutional precedent. The French ambassador nodded respectfully as she switched seamlessly between English and flawless French. 3 Fortune 500 CEOs had already asked for her business card, despite knowing she was just a billionaire's wife now. Magnificent woman. Your wife, commented Charles Rothschild, the banking dynasty heir. Harvard Law Review, wasn't she? Top of her class at Columbia? I heard she single-handedly restructured the Pemberton merger before you married her. Andrew's jaw tightened. Before he married her, Monica had been Manhattan's most feared corporate attorney. She had built her reputation destroying men like Rothschild in boardroom battles that left entire companies bleeding. Now she was supposed to be content playing hostess to his social climbing ambitions. Monica felt Andrew's eyes boring into her from across the room and recognized the dangerous glitter she'd learned to fear. Her lower back ached with a persistent pain that had been growing stronger throughout the evening. The baby was due any day now, and her body was sending increasingly urgent signals that tonight might be the night. Please excuse me, she said gracefully to the group of admirers surrounding her. I need to find my husband. She moved through the crowd with practiced elegance, nodding and smiling at the appropriate moments, but inside she felt like a swimmer fighting against a riptide. The mansion's opulent rooms suddenly felt suffocating. The laughter seemed too loud, the perfume too heavy, the lights too bright. Andrew intercepted her near the grand staircase, his hand clamping around her wrist with bruising force. To observers, it might have looked like an affectionate gesture, but Monica felt his fingers digging into her pulse point with deliberate cruelty. "Having fun playing intellectual with my guests?" he whispered against her ear, his breath hot and wine-soaked. Monica's voice remained steady, despite the pain radiating up her arm. "I was simply engaging in conversation. Isn't that what you wanted when you insisted I attend tonight? I wanted you to smile and look beautiful, not show off like some kind of—" He paused, his lips twisting into a sneer. "Some kind of know-it-all who thinks she's better than everyone else." The familiar shame tried to creep up Monica's spine, but she pushed it down with the steel resolve that had carried her through Harvard Law School on a full scholarship. "Andrew, please. I'm not feeling well. Could we perhaps go home? The baby—" "Don't act weak," he hissed, his grip tightening until she had to bite her lip to keep from gasping. "You're carrying my child, the heir to my empire. Don't embarrass me tonight." Monica felt a sharp contraction ripple across her belly, stronger than the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd been having for weeks. This one made her breath catch in her throat. "Andrew, I think something might be—" Mrs. Clark, the governor of New York, appeared beside them with his wife, both beaming with political charm. "I was hoping to steal a moment with you about the education reform bill. Your insights could be invaluable." Monica straightened, pushing through the pain with the grace that had made her legendary in courtrooms. "Governor Morrison, I'd be honored to discuss it with you." But even as she spoke, another contraction built in her lower back. For 20 minutes, she discussed policy with New York's most powerful political figures, while Andrew seethed beside her. Every brilliant point she made, every solution she proposed, every moment of respect she commanded only fueled his rage. He had married her to possess her magnificence, not to be overshadowed by it. Finally, the group dispersed, and Monica turned to Andrew with desperation creeping into her voice. "Please, let's go home. I'm not feeling well. I just need your care. I'm only days away from giving birth." Andrew's face darkened with the kind of fury that had learned to disguise itself behind expensive suits and charitable donations. The wine had loosened the restraints on his cruelest impulses, and Monica's public display of intelligence had scratched at every insecurity that money couldn't heal. "Stop whining!" he exploded, his voice carrying across the marble foyer. "You're nothing without me!" The words hit the assembled guests like a physical blow. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Crystal glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the string quartet seemed to falter. Manhattan's most sophisticated elite suddenly found themselves witnesses to domestic cruelty dressed in designer clothing. Monica stood frozen in the sudden silence, her hand protectively curved over her belly, feeling 200 pairs of eyes boring into her. Some faces showed shock, others embarrassment, and a few revealed the kind of schadenfreude that fed on others' humiliation. But not one person stepped forward. Not one voice rose in her defense. Justice Chen cleared his throat and turned away. The French ambassador suddenly became fascinated by the Monet hanging on the far wall. Senator Williams discovered an urgent need to check her phone. One by one, the people who had praised Monica's brilliance moments before found reasons to look elsewhere. Andrew grabbed her arm and began dragging her toward the entrance, his fingers leaving marks on her dark skin. "We're leaving, now." Outside, the Manhattan night had turned vicious. Storm clouds rolled across the sky like smoke from a battlefield, and the first fat raindrops were already spattering the marble steps. Andrew's Bentley waited at the curb, its black surface reflecting the lightning that split the darkness. "Get in the car," he snarled, shoving Monica toward the vehicle with such force that she stumbled. Behind them, through the mansion's tall windows, the party continued as if nothing had happened. The same people who had hung on Monica's every word about justice and protection now lifted their glasses in toasts to her humiliation. Monica slid into the leather seat, her dress tearing slightly on the doorframe. As Andrew slammed her door and stalked around to the driver's side, she caught sight of another car starting up behind them. In the driver's seat, she glimpsed Hans Martin's face, tight with controlled fury. For 6 months, he had been their driver. For 6 months, he had watched Andrew's cruelty, with eyes that saw everything and said nothing. But tonight, something in his expression promised that silence was about to end. Andrew gunned the engine and sped into the storm, his rage filling the car like poisonous gas. Monica pressed her hands against her belly as another contraction built, stronger than before, and whispered a prayer to a God she hoped was still listening. The night that would reshape their lives had begun with champagne and charity, but Monica Sinclair Clark was about to discover that some storms were strong enough to wash away entire worlds, and sometimes that was exactly what needed to happen. Chapter 2. The Storm. Unleashed. Thunder had nothing on the fury building in Andrew Clark's chest as he watched his wife's quiet dignity make him feel like the monster he had always been. The Bentley's engine roared through the empty streets of Manhattan like a caged beast seeking escape. Rain hammered against the windshield with increasing violence, each drop exploding like tiny grenades against the glass. Andrew gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white, his rage radiating through the car's interior like heat from a furnace. Monica sat in silence, her hands pressed against her swollen belly as contractions rippled through her body with growing intensity. 7 minutes apart now, then 6. The pain was different tonight, deeper, more purposeful, as if her daughter had decided that this storm-torn evening was the perfect time to enter the world. "Did you enjoy your little performance back there?" Andrew's voice cut through the car like broken glass. "Playing intellectual with my guests? Making me look like a fool?" Monica kept her eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window, watching the city lights blur past in streams of gold and white. "I was being polite. You asked me to attend your party, and I attended. I asked you to be my wife, not my competition." The words exploded from him with such venom that Monica flinched. "Do you have any idea how it looks when my own wife shows me up in front of people who matter?" A contraction seized her then, strong enough to steal her breath. Monica doubled over slightly, her hand gripping the door handle as she waited for the pain to pass. When she could speak again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Andrew, please. The baby's coming. I think tonight might be... Everything is always about you, isn't it?" He snarled, jerking the wheel as he took a corner too fast. "Your career, your reputation, your comfort. What about what I need? What about what I've given you?" The speedometer climbed as Andrew's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The Bentley flew through red lights and empty intersections, hydroplaning slightly on the rain-slicked asphalt. Monica gripped her seat, torn between fear of her husband's reckless driving and the increasing certainty that her body was preparing for labor, whether she was ready or not. Behind them, maintaining a careful distance, Hans Martin followed in the second car. His heart pounded as he watched Andrew's erratic driving, every dangerous turn and sudden acceleration sending ice through his veins. For 6 months, he had positioned himself as close as possible to Monica, accepting the role of chauffeur because proximity was the only protection he could offer. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Andrew's cruelty had shed its civilized mask in front of 200 witnesses, and the look in Monica's eyes when she'd climbed into the Bentley had spoken of a woman preparing for war. "I built you from nothing," Andrew continued, his voice rising above the storm's fury. "You were just another ambitious lawyer scratching for clients when I found you. I gave you my name, my world, my fortune, and this is how you repay me? By making me look small." Monica's breath caught as another contraction gripped her. This one lasted longer, radiating from her lower back around to her abdomen with iron-fisted intensity. When it passed, she found her voice somehow steady despite her fear. "I never asked you to make me small, Andrew. I never asked you to dim my light so yours could shine brighter." The words hit him like physical blows. Andrew's face contorted with rage so pure it was almost beautiful in its completeness. He had married Monica Sinclair because she was magnificent, brilliant, beautiful, untouchable. But somewhere in the 3 years since their wedding, her magnificence had become a daily reminder of his own mediocrity. You want to be brilliant? You want to show everyone how smart you are? His laughter was sharp enough to cut glass. Let's see how brilliant you are when you don't have my money and my name protecting you. The Bentley suddenly swerved off the main highway onto a dark service road. Monica felt her heart skip as she realized they weren't headed home anymore. The road stretched ahead of them like a black ribbon, bordered by empty fields and abandoned warehouses. No streetlights, no other cars. Just miles of nothing and the storm that seemed to grow stronger with every passing second. "Andrew, where are we going?" Monica tried to keep her voice level, but fear was creeping in around the edges. "The baby. If I'm in labor, I need to get to a hospital." "You need to learn a lesson," he said, his voice deadly quiet now. "You need to remember who you were before I lifted you up, and who you'll be if I decide to let you fall." Hans, following at a distance that allowed him to keep their taillights in sight, felt every muscle in his body coil with tension. The service road was deserted, the kind of place where terrible things happened and no one heard the screams. His foot pressed harder on the accelerator, closing the gap between their vehicles. Monica gasped as the strongest contraction yet rolled through her body. This time she couldn't hide her pain. A low moan escaped her lips as her hand instinctively pressed against her belly. The baby was definitely coming. Whether in an hour or 6 hours, labor had begun. "Please," she whispered, abandoning pride in favor of desperation. "Whatever you're planning, please don't do it tonight. If something happens to me, something could happen to your daughter." Andrew's laugh was the sound of something beautiful being destroyed. "My daughter will be fine. She's strong, like me. It's her mother I'm worried about. All this talk about being powerful and independent, but you've gotten soft, haven't you? Pampered. Forgotten what it's like to fight for survival." The Bentley's brakes screamed as Andrew suddenly slammed them, the car skidding to a stop on the gravel shoulder. Rain pounded the roof like 1,000 angry fists, and lightning split the sky so close Monica could smell the ozone. Andrew turned to face her, and Monica saw something in his eyes that made her blood freeze. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was the cold, calculated cruelty of a man who had decided that breaking someone completely was the only way to feel whole. "Get out!" The words were spoken quietly, almost conversationally, but they hit Monica like a physical assault. "Andrew, please." "I can't. The baby will get out." The explosion of rage filled the car's interior, and Monica recoiled as if he had struck her. "Walk home. 20 miles should give you plenty of time to think about whether you want to be my wife or my enemy." Monica stared at him in shock, unable to process what he was asking. "You can't be serious. It's pouring rain. I'm 9 months pregnant. I could go into full labor at any moment." "Then you'd better start walking fast." He reached across her and yanked open the passenger door. Rain immediately began soaking the leather seats, and the sound of the storm rushed in like the roar of some primeval beast. "Andrew, and please don't do this," Monica whispered, her voice breaking for the first time. "I'm begging you. If not for me, then for your daughter. She could die if—" "Maybe then you'll learn obedience," he snarled, grabbing her arm and shoving her toward the open door. "Maybe then you'll remember that everything you have comes from me, and everything you are exists because I allow it." Monica felt the rain hit her face like ice-cold needles as she stumbled out of the car. Her designer gown was instantly soaked through, the emerald silk clinging to her pregnant form like a second skin. She turned back toward Andrew, one hand on the car door, making one final plea. "Please don't leave me here. I love you. I've always loved you. I just—" The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed across the empty landscape like a gunshot. Through the rain-streaked window, Monica could see Andrew's silhouette, but his face was hidden in shadow. The engine revved once, twice, and then the Bentley lurched forward, gravel spraying from beneath its wheels. Monica stood frozen in the storm's fury as the man she had married drove away, his taillights disappearing into the darkness like the eyes of some retreating demon. She was alone on a deserted road, 20 miles from home, with a baby who seemed determined to be born tonight. Lightning split the sky, and in its brief, brilliant illumination, Monica saw headlights approaching through the rain. As thunder roared across the empty highway like the voice of God's own fury, Monica Sinclair Clark stood in the storm that would either destroy her or forge her into something stronger than diamonds, and in the distance, salvation approached with gentle hands and a heart brave enough to catch a falling queen. Chapter 3. The Guardian Angel. Hans Martin had been born to rule empires, but standing in the rain, watching Andrew Clark abandon the woman who deserved to be worshipped, he learned that some crowns were worth surrendering for the chance to serve a true queen. The headlights cut through the storm like twin beacons of hope, their warm glow transforming the rain into cascades of liquid silver. Hans Martin pulled his Mercedes to a gentle stop 20 feet from where Monica stood, trembling on the roadside, her emerald gown plastered against her pregnant form by the merciless downpour. He sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the woman he had loved in silence for 6 months. She looked like a goddess abandoned by lesser mortals, magnificent even in her vulnerability. Her chin raised with defiant dignity, despite the tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. Hans had followed at a distance, maintaining the careful boundaries that his role as chauffeur demanded. But the moment Andrew had driven away laughing, those boundaries had shattered like glass. He was no longer just the driver. Tonight, he was Monica's salvation. The car door opened, and Hans stepped into the storm, rain immediately soaking through his black chauffeur's uniform. But he moved with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to command, reaching into the back seat to retrieve a thick woolen coat that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Mrs. Clark," he said, his voice somehow gentle despite having to speak over the thunder. He approached slowly, respectfully, the way one might approach a wounded lioness. "You're safe now." Monica looked up at him through the rain, her dark eyes wide with shock and something that might have been gratitude. She was shivering so violently that her words came out broken and fragmented. I can't believe he... "I've got you," Hans said simply, wrapping the coat around her shoulders with movements so careful they might have been choreographed. The wool was warm and dry, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and something indefinably masculine. "Let me get you out of this storm." Monica allowed him to guide her toward the Mercedes, her legs unsteady beneath her. As they walked, another contraction hit with the force of a physical blow, doubling her over with a gasp of pain. Hans immediately steadied her, his strong arms providing anchor points in the chaos of her body's rebellion. "The baby," she managed to whisper when the contraction passed. I think it's time." Hans's face went pale, but his voice remained steady. "How far apart are the contractions?" 5 minutes. "Maybe less." Monica looked up at him through the rain, suddenly seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. There was something different about Hans Martin tonight. The deferential posture of the employed driver had vanished, replaced by quiet authority that seemed to bend reality around his will. He helped her into the passenger seat with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with Andrew's roughness earlier. The interior of the Mercedes was warm and dry, equipped with luxury features that Monica hadn't expected in what she'd assumed was Andrew's company car. "The nearest hospital is 30 minutes away in good weather," Hans said, sliding behind the wheel. "In this storm it could take longer, but I know a private medical facility that's closer. They'll have everything we need." Monica was about to ask what kind of private facility when another contraction seized her. This one was different, deeper, more urgent, as if her daughter had decided that the abandoned roadside was as good a place as any to make her entrance into the world. Hans started the engine, and pulled onto the road with smooth precision, his hands steady on the wheel despite the chaos around them. Monica gripped the door handle and tried to focus on breathing through the pain. But questions were beginning to surface through her physical distress. "Hans," she said when the contraction passed, "how do you know about a private medical facility?" His hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "I make it my business to know about medical options. When you care about someone's safety, you prepare for emergencies." The words hung in the air between them, like a confession half-spoken. Monica studied his profile in the dashboard's glow, noting details she had somehow missed during 6 months of daily interaction. The expensive watch on his wrist that caught the light like captured stars. The way his presence seemed to fill the car with quiet strength. The fact that he drove with the confidence of a man accustomed to navigating more than just Manhattan traffic. "You followed us from the party," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes. Why?" Hans was quiet for so long that Monica thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible above the storm. "Because I've been watching Andrew hurt you for months, and tonight felt different. Tonight felt dangerous." The admission sparked something warm in Monica's chest, despite her physical pain. For 6 months, she had felt invisible in her own marriage, her brilliance dimmed by Andrew's insecurities and her spirit slowly strangled by his control. The idea that someone had been watching, caring, protecting from the shadows was almost too beautiful to believe. Another contraction built, this one so strong that Monica cried out despite her attempts at self-control. Her hand instinctively reached for support and found Hans's, his fingers immediately intertwining with hers with careful strength. "Breathe with me," he said, his voice steady and calm. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. You're stronger than the pain. You're stronger than anything that's ever tried to break you." Monica focused on his voice, using it as an anchor while her body prepared for the monumental task ahead. When the contraction passed, she realized she was still holding his hand. She should have felt embarrassed, inappropriate, but instead she felt safer than she had in months. The Mercedes turned off the main road onto a tree-lined drive that Monica didn't recognize. Through the rain, she could see the outline of a large building with warm lights glowing in multiple windows. It looked more like a private estate than a medical facility. "Hans, where are we?" "Somewhere safe," he replied, pulling up to a covered entrance where 2 people in medical scrubs waited with a wheelchair despite the late hour. "Somewhere where you and your daughter will be protected and cared for properly." Monica stared at the scene before her in confusion. The medical staff moved with practiced efficiency, clearly having been summoned by some advanced communication. The building itself radiated quiet luxury, its architecture speaking of old money and careful taste. "I don't understand," she whispered as Hans came around to help her out of the car. "How did they know we were coming? How is this possible?" Hans paused, his hand on the car door, and looked at her with eyes that seemed to hold depths she was only beginning to fathom. "Because, Monica, there are things about me that I haven't told you. Things I've kept hidden because the truth seemed less important than being able to protect you. But tonight, everything changes." As he helped her into the wheelchair, another contraction seized Monica with such intensity that the world blurred around its edges. Through the pain, she was dimly aware of being wheeled into a building that smelled of jasmine and expensive wood polish rather than antiseptic and fear. "The baby's coming," she gasped to the medical team, but they were already moving with choreographed precision. Their actions speaking of preparation and expertise that went far beyond a typical emergency response. Hans walked beside the wheelchair, his hand resting gently on Monica's shoulder, and she found herself clinging to his presence like a lifeline in churning waters. "Who are you really?" she whispered as they entered an elevator lined with mirrors that reflected their images in infinite repetition. Hans met her eyes in one of those reflections, and Monica saw something in his expression that made her heart skip, despite the pain coursing through her body. "I'm the man who's been waiting his entire life for the chance to protect you," he said simply. "And tonight, everything you think you know about me is going to change." As the elevator doors closed around them like the jaws of destiny, Monica Sinclair Clark realized she was about to give birth, surrounded by mysteries she didn't understand, protected by a man whose true identity remained hidden in shadows, but whose love blazed bright enough to illuminate the darkness, gathering around her shattered world. Chapter 4, The Birth of Miracles. Some moments are so powerful they split time itself in half, creating a before and after that can never be rejoined. And as Monica Sinclair Clark entered the most beautiful room she had ever seen, she knew she was crossing a threshold that would transform everything. The medical suite looked like something from a billionaire's private dream. Warm wood paneling glowed under soft lighting that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Original artwork adorned the spaces between medical equipment that hummed with quiet efficiency. The bed was draped in linens that felt like silk beneath Monica's rain-soaked skin as the medical team helped her settle into position. Dr. Sarah Chen, a woman whose competence radiated from her very presence, performed her examination with gentle professionalism. "You're at 7 centimeters, Mrs. Clark. Your daughter has decided tonight is the night, and she's not interested in waiting." Monica gripped the bed rails as another contraction built, this one so intense it seemed to originate in her very soul. Through the pain, she was acutely aware of Hans standing just inside the doorway, his presence somehow both respectful and protective. He had changed from his wet chauffeur's uniform into dark slacks and a white shirt that seemed to transform him from employee to something else entirely. "How is this possible?" Monica gasped when the contraction passed. "This facility, these doctors, the equipment, and how did you arrange all of this?" Dr. Chen looked between Monica and Hans with understanding eyes. "Perhaps we should focus on your delivery first, and save the explanations for after we welcome your daughter into the world." But Monica's analytical mind refused to be distracted even by labor. She had spent her legal career reading situations and people, and everything about this place screamed of wealth and influence beyond anything Andrew could access. The medical equipment was cutting edge, the kind found only in the world's most exclusive facilities. The staff moved with the confidence of people accustomed to serving clients who demanded perfection. Hans stepped closer to the bed, his eyes asking permission before he spoke. "Monica, I need you to trust me. Everything you need to know, I'll tell you. But right now, your daughter needs you to focus on bringing her safely into this world." Another contraction seized her, and this time Monica felt something fundamental shift in her body. The pain was no longer just pain. It had become purpose, drive, the engine that would deliver her child from the safety of the womb into the uncertainty of the world beyond. "She's coming," Dr. Chen announced, her voice carrying the excitement that accompanied every new life. "Monica, on the next contraction, I need you to push. And if you'd like to support her, please take her hand." Monica looked up at Hans through tears she hadn't realized were falling. For 6 months, he had been a shadow in her life, present but invisible, caring but distant. Now, as she prepared for the most vulnerable moment of her existence, he was offering to be her anchor. "Please," she whispered, and Hans immediately moved to her side. His hand enveloped hers with strength that seemed to flow directly into her body. When the next contraction built, Monica squeezed his fingers and pushed with every ounce of will she possessed. Hans whispered encouragement in her ear, his voice steady and sure. "You're magnificent," he breathed. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. Your daughter is so lucky to have you as her mother." The words wrapped around Monica like armor against the pain. She had spent 3 years being told she was too much, too strong, too intelligent. Hearing Hans celebrate her strength instead of asking her to diminish it felt like being seen for the first time in years. "I can see her head," Dr. Chen announced. "One more push, Monica. One more, and you'll meet your daughter." Monica bore down with everything she had, her entire existence focused on this single moment of creation. Hans's hand provided the strength she needed, his presence the safety that allowed her to be completely vulnerable. At 3:47 a.m., Aria Michelle Clark entered the world with a cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. She was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a head full of dark hair, and lungs that announced her displeasure at being evicted from her comfortable home. Dr. Chen placed the baby on Monica's chest, and time stopped. The pain, the exhaustion, the confusion about Hans's identity, the trauma of Andrew's abandonment, everything faded into insignificance compared to the miracle of the small person now lying against her heart. "Hello, beautiful girl," Monica whispered, her voice thick with wonder. "I'm your mama. I'm so sorry your daddy couldn't be here to meet you," but she looked up to find Hans, staring at the baby, with an expression of such pure awe that it took her breath away. Tears streamed down his face as he gazed at Aria with the wonder of a man witnessing something sacred. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She's absolutely perfect." Something in his tone made Monica's heart skip. Hans was looking at Aria, not with the polite interest of an employee witnessing his employer's personal moment, but with the profound emotion of someone deeply invested in both mother and child. "Would you like to hold her?" Monica asked, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. Hans's eyes widened. "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude." "Please," Monica said simply. "I'd like you to meet her properly." With movements so gentle they might have been choreographed by angels, Hans accepted Aria into his arms. The baby, who'd been fussing slightly, immediately settled against his chest with a contented sigh. Hans looked down at her with an expression that spoke of promises being made, vows being taken, a heart being claimed by someone who weighed less than 8 pounds but wielded infinite power. "I'll protect you," he whispered to the baby. His voice so soft Monica almost missed the words, "I'll protect both of you. Always." The weight of his promise settled over the room like a blessing. Monica watched this mysterious man hold her daughter with reverence that brought fresh tears to her eyes. Whatever secrets Hans was keeping, whatever truth he had yet to reveal, she could see his soul in the way he cradled Aria. "Hans," she said quietly, "I need to know who you really are. My daughter deserves to understand the man who helped bring her into the world." Hans looked at her over Aria's sleeping form, and Monica saw him reach some internal decision. The careful mask he had worn for 6 months began to crack, revealing glimpses of something far more complex beneath. "My name is Hans Friedrich Martin," he said simply. "My family has owned significant real estate holdings across Europe for 4 centuries. I'm worth approximately $12 billion, and I became your driver because watching Andrew hurt you from a distance became unbearable." Monica stared at him in shock, her mind struggling to process this revelation. "You're a billionaire? But why would you? How could you?" "Because proximity was the only protection I could offer," Hans interrupted gently. "Because seeing you diminished and controlled and treated as less than the extraordinary woman you are became more painful than surrendering my public identity." Before Monica could respond, the sound of shouting echoed from somewhere in the building. Heavy footsteps pounded down hallways, growing closer with each passing second. "That's Andrew," Monica whispered, her body tensing with familiar fear. Hans immediately handed Aria back to Monica and moved toward the door, his entire bearing transforming from gentle caregiver to something altogether more dangerous. "No one gets through that door without my permission," he said, his voice carrying an authority that Monica had never heard before. "You've given birth to your daughter in safety, and that safety will continue for as long as I draw breath." The door burst open, and Andrew Clark stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and rage, his expensive suit wrinkled and his eyes wild with something that might have been panic or fury or both. "You dared to give birth without me?" He snarled at Monica, completely ignoring Hans's presence. My daughter, my heir, and you bring her into the world in some secret location like she's something to be hidden. As Andrew raised his hand with the clear intention of striking the mother of his newborn child, and Martin stepped between them with the fluid grace of a man born to protect queens, and Monica realized that the fairy tale was far from over. The dragon had just arrived, and her prince was about to reveal exactly what kind of power he wielded when the people he loved were threatened. Chapter 5. The Dragon's Fury. Violence was the language. Andrew Clark spoke most fluently, but he was about to discover that some men were born speaking dialects of power he had never learned to comprehend. Andrew's hand never reached its target, and stepped between husband and wife with movements so swift they seemed almost supernatural, his fingers closing around Andrew's wrist with the kind of strength that could crush bones without visible effort. "Don't touch her," Hans said, his voice carrying a deadly calm that made the room's temperature seem to drop 10 degrees. Andrew tried to jerk his hand free, but Hans's grip held firm. For the first time in his adult life, Andrew found himself physically overpowered by another man, and the shock of it sobered him more effectively than any amount of coffee could have managed. "How dare you?" Andrew sputtered, his face flushing red with humiliation. "How dare a useless driver lay hands on me in front of my wife and child?" Monica pressed baby Aria closer to her chest, the infant's warmth providing comfort against the chill of fear that had entered the room with Andrew's arrival. She had seen her husband angry before, had endured his cruelty in private moments when his mask slipped, but this felt different. This felt like the prelude to real violence. Hans released Andrew's wrist with deliberate care, but he didn't step back. If anything, he seemed to grow larger, his presence expanding to fill the space between Andrew and the bed, where Monica held their daughter. "I am many things, Mr. Clark, but useless is not one of them," Hans said, his accent carrying traces of European aristocracy that Monica had never noticed before. "And right now, I am the only thing standing between you and a mistake that would destroy what remains of your pathetic excuse for a life." Andrew's laugh was sharp and ugly. "My pathetic life. I'm worth $3 billion. I own half of Manhattan's commercial district. Presidents take my phone calls. And you're nothing but hired help who's forgotten his place. Your net worth is actually closer to $2.8 billion, Hans corrected with casual precision, and most of that is tied up in properties that are currently underwater due to your recent investment disasters. The Pemberton deal alone cost you $400 million when it collapsed last month." Monica's legal mind immediately recognized the significance of what Hans had just said. The Pemberton deal had been one of Andrew's most closely guarded secrets, a failed acquisition attempt that he had managed to keep out of the financial press through careful manipulation and strategic bribes. "How could you possibly know about Pemberton?" Andrew demanded, his voice rising with something that sounded suspiciously like panic. Hans smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face from gentle servant to something altogether more predatory. "Because I know everything about you, Andrew. Your business failures, your mounting debts, your desperate attempts to maintain an empire built on loans you can no longer service. I know about the federal investigation into your accounting practices, the SEC inquiry you've been dodging, and the very real possibility that your fortune is nothing more than an elaborate house of cards." Monica watched this exchange with growing fascination and horror. The man she had married, the billionaire whose wealth had seemed unshakable, was being systematically dismantled by their driver. But more than that, Hans was speaking with the authority of someone who clearly had access to information that should have been impossible for a chauffeur to obtain. "You're lying," Andrew snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "The Cayman Islands account ending in 7742, Hans continued relentlessly. The one you've been using to hide assets from the IRS. It currently contains exactly $47 million, down from $340 million 6 months ago. Would you like me to continue? Andrew's face went pale, and Monica saw something she had never seen before in her husband's eyes, genuine fear. Not anger, not rage, but the stark terror of a man who had just realized he was completely outmatched. Baby Arya stirred in Monica's arms, making soft newborn sounds that seemed impossibly sweet against the tension filling the room. The contrast between her daughter's innocence and the battle of wills playing out beside her bed struck Monica as profoundly surreal. "Who are you?" Andrew whispered, the question barely audible. Hans straightened to his full height, and Monica realized for the first time just how imposing he could be when he stopped trying to fade into the background. He moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to command, his entire bearing radiating the kind of authority that came from generations of breeding and power. "My name is Hans Friedrich Martin," he said, each syllable pronounced with crystalline precision. "Perhaps you've heard of Martin Holdings International?" Monica's breath caught in her throat. Martin Holdings was one of Europe's oldest and most powerful real estate dynasties, a family empire that controlled prime commercial properties across 3 continents. She had studied their acquisition strategies in law school, marveling at their ability to expand quietly while other conglomerates made headlines. Andrew's face went from pale to grey. "That's impossible. The Martin family, they're worth $12 billion as of this morning's market close," Hans finished. "And yes, I am the sole heir to that fortune. I am also the man who has spent the last 6 months working as your driver, because I couldn't bear to watch you destroy the most extraordinary woman I've ever met." The silence that followed this revelation was so complete that Monica could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. She stared at Hans, this man she had thought she knew, who had brought her tea and driven her to appointments and listened to her pour out her heart during long rides through the city, and tried to reconcile his humble service with the magnitude of what he had just revealed. "You gave up your identity to be my driver?" she whispered. Hans turned to look at her, and the love in his eyes was so naked, so complete, that Monica felt her heart skip several beats. "I gave up nothing that mattered," he said simply. "Wealth means nothing if you can't use it to protect the people who deserve protection. Power is worthless if it doesn't serve love." Andrew let out a sound that was part laugh, part sob. "You're both insane. You think this changes anything? She's still my wife. That's still my daughter. All your billions won't change the fact that she belongs to me." The words struck Monica like physical blows, but instead of the familiar shame and fear they usually inspired, she felt something else rising in her chest. Fury, pure, clean rage at being discussed like property, at being reduced to a possession that could be owned and controlled. "I belong to myself," she said, her voice carrying the same steel that had once made corporate executives tremble in boardroom battles. "And Arya belongs to no one but herself. We are not your property, Andrew. We never were." Andrew spun toward her, his face twisting with renewed rage. "Without me, you're nothing. I made you." "I gave you everything you have. You gave me nothing I hadn't already earned," Monica replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I was successful before I met you. I was brilliant before I met you. I was powerful before I met you. All you did was convince me to hide those things to make you feel bigger." Hans stepped closer to Andrew, and Monica could see the coiled violence in his muscles, the barely restrained power of a man who had reached the absolute limit of his patience. "You have exactly 10 seconds to leave this room," Hans said quietly. "If you're still here when I finish counting, I will personally ensure that every federal agency investigating your business practices receives detailed files about your activities." "You're bluffing," Andrew said, but he was already backing toward the door. 7, 6, 5. "This isn't over," Andrew snarled, pointing at Monica. "She's my wife. That child carries my name. You can't just steal my family. 2, 1. Andrew turned and fled, his expensive shoes slipping on the polished floor in his haste to escape. The door slammed behind him with a sound like thunder, leaving the room suddenly blissfully quiet. Monica looked down at Arya, who had slept peacefully through the entire confrontation, then up at Hans, who was visibly struggling to control the adrenaline still coursing through his system. "Is it true?" she asked softly. "Everything you told him about his finances?" Hans nodded grimly. "Andrew is 3 months away from bankruptcy. His empire is collapsing, and he's been using increasingly desperate measures to hide it. Within 6 months, he'll lose everything." Monica absorbed this information with the analytical part of her mind, while her heart processed the larger implications. "And you knew all of this when you became our driver?" "I knew some of it. I learned the rest while protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" Hans met her eyes, and Monica saw depths of concern she was only beginning to understand. From the desperation of a man who was about to lose everything and needed someone to blame for his failures. From the violence that comes when weak men feel their power slipping away. Baby Arya chose that moment to wake fully, her cries filling the room with demands for attention and care. Monica immediately focused on soothing her daughter, but her mind continued racing with questions and implications. "What happens now?" she asked as she adjusted Arya's blanket. Hans sat down in the chair beside her bed, and for the first time since Andrew's arrival, his expression softened back into the gentle concern she had grown accustomed to. "Now you rest and recover from giving birth to the most beautiful child I've ever seen," he said simply. "Everything else can wait until you're strong enough to make decisions with a clear mind." Monica looked at this man, who had revealed himself to be simultaneously everything and nothing she'd believed him to be, and felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the physical afterglow of childbirth. "Hans," she said quietly, "why did you really become our driver?" "The truth, this time." He was quiet for so long that Monica thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words fell into the silence like stones dropped into still water. "Because I attended a business dinner 6 months ago, where Andrew humiliated you in front of 20 people for having the audacity to express an intelligent opinion," Hans said, his voice carrying the weight of confession. "Because I watched you shrink into yourself afterward, watched your light dim, and I realized I would rather spend my life as a servant in your presence than as a king in a world where women like you are treated as ornaments rather than the extraordinary human beings you are." The words hung between them like a bridge spanning an impossible distance, and Monica felt herself standing at the threshold of something that could change her life forever. "What you're describing sounds like love," she whispered. Hans met her eyes without flinching. "Yes," he said simply, "it does." As Monica held her daughter and stared into the eyes of a man who had surrendered everything to protect her, she realized that fairy tales were not stories about perfect people living perfect lives. They were stories about broken people finding the courage to rebuild their worlds around love. And sometimes the most powerful magic in the universe was the simple act of someone choosing to see you as worth saving. Chapter 6. The Revelation of Hearts. Truth was a double-edged sword that could cut through deception to reveal beauty, or slice through dreams to expose harsh reality. And Monica Sinclair Clark was about to discover which edge she had been living on. The medical suite had been transformed into a cocoon of golden light by the sunrise streaming through windows that Monica only now realized were stained glass masterpieces. Baby Arya slept peacefully in her arms, her tiny chest rising and falling with the rhythm of absolute innocence. While Monica tried to process the earth-shattering revelations of the past few hours, Hans had moved to the window and stood silhouetted against the morning light, his profile sharp and aristocratic in a way that Monica wondered how she had missed during 6 months of daily interaction. Everything about him seemed different now, his posture straighter, his presence more commanding, as if revealing his true identity had allowed him to inhabit his full power. "I have so many questions," Monica said, her voice hoarse from the exertion of labor and the emotional upheaval of the night. "I don't even know where to begin." Hans turned from the window, and Monica saw vulnerability in his expression that surprised her. For all his revealed wealth and power, he looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, uncertain whether the ground ahead would hold his weight. "Ask me anything," he said simply. "After everything you've been through, you deserve complete honesty." Monica adjusted Arya's blanket with gentle precision, using the familiar motion to organize her thoughts. Her legal training had taught her to approach complex situations systematically, but nothing in her education had prepared her for interrogating a secret billionaire who had masqueraded as her driver out of love. "The apartment you live in," she began, "the modest place in Queens that Andrew pays for as part of your employment package, is a property I purchased 3 years ago under an assumed name," Hans finished. "I've maintained residences around the world, but that apartment became home because it allowed me to be close to you." "And your background? The references Andrew checked when he hired you?" Hans had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "My security team created an entire identity, complete with employment history and references who would vouch for Hans Martin, the chauffeur. It's not difficult when you have sufficient resources and motivation." Monica felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest. Not humor exactly, but a kind of stunned appreciation for the elaborate lengths Hans had gone to in order to position himself as her protector. "You created fake references to become a servant in my household. I created whatever was necessary to ensure your safety," Hans replied, his tone carrying no shame, only conviction. "Andrew's treatment of you was becoming increasingly erratic. I needed to be close enough to intervene if necessary." The weight of that revelation settled over Monica like a heavy blanket. For 6 months, she had thought herself utterly alone in her marriage, trapped in golden chains, with no one who understood her situation. To learn that someone had been watching, caring, preparing to help, had been there all along, felt like discovering she had been carrying a winning lottery ticket without knowing it. "You said you attended a business dinner where Andrew humiliated me," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Which dinner?" Hans closed his eyes as if the memory caused physical pain. "The Thornfield acquisition celebration at the plaza. You had prepared an analysis of the regulatory implications that was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. When you tried to share it, Andrew cut you off mid-sentence and told you that the men were talking business, and perhaps you should find something more appropriate to discuss with the wives." Monica remembered that night with crystalline clarity. The shame of being dismissed so publicly. The way every person at that table had suddenly found their wine glasses fascinating rather than meet her eyes. She had excused herself to the ladies' room and cried for 10 minutes before returning to sit in silence for the rest of the evening. "You were there?" "I was supposed to be meeting with Thornfield's board about a property acquisition the following week," Hans explained. "Instead, I watched the most intelligent person in the room be silenced and diminished. And I realized I couldn't stand by and do nothing anymore. So you became my driver. So I became whatever I needed to be to protect you." Monica looked down at Arya, who had begun making small suckling motions in her sleep, clearly dreaming of her next feeding. The baby's presence provided an anchor of reality in a conversation that felt increasingly surreal. "Hans, what you're describing, the lengths you went to, the sacrifice involved, it sounds like obsession." He considered her words carefully before responding. "Perhaps it was at first. But obsession is about possession, about taking something for yourself. Everything I did was about giving you the protection and support you deserved, but weren't receiving. "And what do you want now?" Monica asked, the question carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. "Now that the truth is out, now that Andrew knows who you are, what happens next?" Hans moved closer to the bed, and Monica could see the careful control he was exercising over himself. His hands remained at his sides despite what she suspected was an urge to reach for her. His expression respectful despite the love she could see burning in his eyes. "What I want is irrelevant," he said quietly. "You've just given birth. You've been abandoned by your husband, discovered that your life was built on lies, and learned that your driver is actually a European billionaire who has been secretly protecting you for months. The last thing you need is pressure from me about the future." Monica felt her heart squeeze at his consideration, so different from Andrew's constant demands and expectations. "But if I asked you what you wanted hypothetically—" Hans was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Arya's sleeping face. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of carefully contained hope. "I would want to spend every day for the rest of my life proving that you and Arya deserve to be treasured, not controlled. I would want to watch her grow up knowing that she can be anything she dreams of becoming. I would want to see you remember who you were before Andrew convinced you to hide your light. And romantically?" Monica pressed, surprising herself with her boldness. Hans met her eyes directly, and Monica saw the depth of longing he had been carefully concealing. "Romantically, I would want to court you properly," he said simply. "To win your heart not through deception or desperation, but through honest devotion and patience and the daily choice to put your happiness before my own desires." Monica felt tears prick at her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen and valued so completely. After years of being treated as decoration or property, the idea of being courted like someone whose heart was worth winning felt revolutionary. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps approached the door. Dr. Chen entered with a gentle knock, her professional demeanor providing a welcome return to practical concerns. "How are mother and baby doing this morning?" she asked, moving to check on Arya with practiced efficiency. "Better than expected," Monica replied, surprised to realize it was true. Despite the trauma of the night, despite the confusion about the future, she felt stronger than she had in months. Dr. Chen completed her examination of both Monica and Arya with thorough professionalism. "Everything looks excellent. Monica, you've recovered remarkably well from a very fast labor. Arya is perfect, healthy, alert, and clearly ready to take on the world. When can we go home?" Monica asked, then stopped as she realized she wasn't sure where home was anymore. Hans stepped forward, his voice gentle but sure. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. This facility is equipped for extended recovery, and you'll be completely safe while you decide what comes next." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "I'd recommend at least another day of observation, just to be safe. First babies can be unpredictable, and you've both been through significant stress." After Dr. Chen left, Monica found herself alone with Hans and 1,000 unspoken questions. Arya stirred in her arms, beginning to show signs of hunger, and Monica felt the familiar tug of maternal responsibility that transcended every other concern. "I should feed her," she said. "Of course. I'll give you privacy." "Stay," Monica said, the words surprising them both. "Please, I don't want to be alone right now." Hans settled back into his chair, averting his eyes respectfully as Monica adjusted her hospital gown to nurse Arya. The baby latched immediately, her tiny fist gripping Monica's finger with surprising strength. "She's going to be formidable," Hans observed with a smile. "Like her mother," Monica replied, then paused as she heard her own words. It had been so long since she had acknowledged her own strength that claiming it felt almost foreign. "Exactly like her mother," Hans agreed, and the pride in his voice made Monica's heart skip. They sat in comfortable silence while Arya nursed, the morning sun painting the room in shades of gold and possibility. Monica studied Hans's face, noting details she had somehow missed during 6 months of daily interaction. The aristocratic bone structure that spoke of centuries of breeding. The expensive watch that should have been a giveaway. The way he carried himself when he forgot to diminish his presence. "I was so blind," she murmured. "You were surviving," Hans corrected gently. "And when you're focused on enduring each day, it's easy to miss details that seem unimportant to your immediate safety." Monica considered this, recognizing the truth in his assessment. For 3 years, she had been in survival mode, using all her energy to navigate Andrew's moods and minimize his cruelty. There had been no mental space left for analyzing her driver's subtle inconsistencies. "What happens when Andrew comes back?" she asked. "Because he will come back." Hans's expression hardened slightly. "Andrew is about to become very busy with federal investigators and bankruptcy proceedings. I suspect his interest in fighting for custody will diminish significantly when he realizes how much legal trouble he's facing. You're going to destroy him." "I'm going to allow him to destroy himself with his own actions," Hans corrected. "I'm simply ensuring that the appropriate authorities have access to accurate information about his business practices." Monica felt a complex mixture of emotions at the thought of Andrew's downfall. Relief, certainly, but also a strange sadness for the man she had once believed she loved, before his insecurities had curdled that love into something toxic. And after that, Hans met her eyes with an expression that managed to be both hopeful and patient. "After that, you choose your own future, with complete freedom, complete support, and no pressure from anyone, including me, about what that future should look like." As Monica sat in the golden morning light, nursing her daughter, while a secret prince promised her the freedom to choose her own destiny, she realized that sometimes the most powerful magic in the world was simply having someone believe you deserved better than the life you had been settling for. Chapter 7. The Awakening. Storm. Power was not always loud and dramatic like thunder. Sometimes it was quiet and inevitable like the tide. And Andrew Clark was about to discover that the most dangerous enemies were those who moved like water, reshaping everything they touched without making a sound. 3 days had passed since Arya's birth. 3 days of peace in Hans's private medical facility, where Monica had begun to remember who she was, beneath the layers of fear and diminishment that Andrew's control had wrapped around her soul. She sat by the window, nursing her daughter, while watching Hans work quietly at a desk in the corner. His laptop and phone handling what she now understood was the management of a global empire. "You run your entire business from a hospital room?" she asked, amused by the sight of a billionaire conducting video conferences while wearing casual clothes and speaking in hushed tones so as not to wake the baby. Hans looked up from his laptop with a smile that transformed his entire face. "I've learned to work from wherever I need to be, and right now I need to be here." Monica felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had spent 3 years being made to feel like an inconvenience, a burden that disrupted Andrew's important life. Having someone voluntarily prioritize her well-being felt like discovering a new language of love. Arya finished nursing and immediately began the complex process of trying to fit her entire fist into her mouth. A task she approached with the determined concentration of someone solving advanced calculus. Monica laughed softly as she repositioned her daughter against her shoulder for burping. "She's going to be trouble," she murmured affectionately. "The very best kind." Hans agreed, closing his laptop and moving closer. "May I?" Monica nodded, and Hans gently took Arya for burping duty, the baby settling against his shoulder as if she belonged there. Over the past 3 days, Monica had watched Hans interact with her daughter with a natural tenderness that spoke of genuine affection rather than polite obligation. "You're remarkably good with her for someone who's never had children." "I've had a lot of practice being patient and gentle with precious things," Hans replied, his eyes meeting hers with meaning that made Monica's breath catch. And I've been preparing for this role for longer than you might imagine." Before Monica could ask what he meant by that cryptic statement, the sound of raised voices echoed from somewhere in the building. Hans immediately tensed, his protective instincts clearly triggered by any potential threat to their sanctuary. "What is that?" Monica asked, though part of her already knew. Hans handed Arya back to her mother and moved toward the door with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to handling dangerous situations. "Security is informing someone that they cannot enter this facility without permission. Andrew." Most likely. Monica felt familiar fear begin to creep up her spine, but alongside it was something new. Anger at having her peaceful recovery disrupted by a man who had already done enough damage. "What does he want?" "To reassert control over what he considers his property," Hans replied grimly. "But he's about to learn that the rules have changed significantly since he abandoned you in a storm." The voices grew closer, and Monica could make out Andrew's furious tones among the calmer responses of security personnel. He was demanding to see his wife and child, threatening lawsuits and police intervention, wielding his wealth and status like weapons against people who had clearly dealt with entitled rich men before. "I'm not ready for this," Monica whispered, her arms tightening protectively around Arya. Hans immediately returned to her side, his presence radiating the kind of steady strength that made Monica feel safer just by proximity. "You don't have to face him until you're ready," he said quietly. "I can handle this." "No," Monica surprised herself by saying. "I need to face him myself. I need to stop running from confrontations that are inevitable." Hans studied her face with concern. "Are you sure? You've been through tremendous physical and emotional trauma. There's no shame in needing more time." Monica looked down at her daughter, who had fallen asleep in her arms with the absolute trust that only babies possessed. Arya would grow up watching how her mother handled conflict, learning from Monica's example what it meant to be a strong woman in a world that often preferred women to be small and quiet. "I'm sure," she said, her voice carrying conviction that surprised them both. "But I want you there with me, always," Hans replied simply. The door burst open before security could prevent it, and Andrew strode in wearing a wrinkled suit and the kind of desperate rage that came from a man whose carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. Behind him, two security guards apologized to Hans with expressions that suggested they had tried to prevent this intrusion. "It's all right," Hans told them calmly. "Mr. Clark can have 5 minutes to say whatever he came to say." Andrew's laugh was sharp and ugly. "How generous of the help to give me permission to speak to my own wife." Monica felt her spine straighten as she looked at Andrew for the first time in 3 days. Away from his influence, rested and recovering in safety, she saw him with clarity that shocked her. The man she had once thought larger than life now looked diminished. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the weakness in his posture. His bravado couldn't mask the fear in his eyes. "Hello, Andrew," she said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "I've come to take you home," he announced, as if her preferences were irrelevant to the discussion. "This ridiculous charade has gone on long enough. You've had your dramatic moment, proven whatever point you were trying to make. But now it's time to return to reality." Monica tilted her head slightly, studying him with the analytical gaze she had once used to dissect opposing counsel's arguments in court. "And what reality is that?" "The reality where you're my wife and that baby is my daughter and this man," Andrew gestured dismissively at Hans, "is nothing but hired help who has forgotten his place." "Actually," Monica said, her voice carrying a hint of the steel that had once made corporate executives nervous, "the reality is that you abandoned your pregnant wife on a deserted highway during a storm. The reality is that I gave birth without you because you chose alcohol and ego over your family. The reality is that Hans is the reason your daughter and I are both alive." Andrew's face flushed red with anger and humiliation. "You're being dramatic." I was teaching you a lesson about respect and gratitude. I never intended for you to actually walk 20 miles. But you did intend to leave me there long enough to be afraid, cold, and alone, Monica replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. You intended to punish me for having the audacity to be intelligent in public. You embarrassed me in front of important people. I existed as myself instead of as your accessory, and that threatened you. Monica shifted Arya to one arm and used her free hand to smooth down her daughter's dark hair. This is exactly why I can't come home with you, Andrew. You don't want a wife. You want a beautiful object that enhances your image. Andrew's gaze flickered between Monica and Hans, and she could see him calculating, trying to find an angle that would give him leverage in a situation where he was rapidly losing control. Fine, he said, his voice turning coldly manipulative. If you want to play house with the help, that's your choice. But my daughter comes with me. Monica felt ice flood her veins, but alongside the fear was a mother's fury that blazed hotter than any emotion she had ever experienced. Your daughter? She repeated, her voice deceptively quiet. Your daughter, who you called worthless for not being born male. Your daughter, who you refused to hold because she represented failure to produce your perfect heir. I was upset. Andrew backtracked quickly, clearly recognizing that he had miscalculated. New fathers say things they don't mean, but she's still my child, and legally, you have no rights to a child you attempted to endanger through your reckless abandonment of her pregnant mother, Hans interjected, his voice carrying an authority that made Andrew step back involuntarily. Andrew whirled to face Hans, his desperation manifesting as rage. You think your money makes you important? You think pretending to be noble changes what you are? You're nothing but a stalker who manipulated his way into my family. I'm the man who saved your wife and daughter's lives, Hans replied calmly. I'm also the man who has detailed documentation of your business practices, your financial irregularities, and your pattern of domestic abuse. The color drained from Andrew's face. You can't prove domestic abuse. I never laid a hand on her. Emotional abuse, financial control, public humiliation, and ultimately endangerment of a pregnant woman, Hans listed methodically. All documented, all witnessed, all sufficient to terminate your parental rights permanently. Monica watched this exchange with growing amazement at Hans's preparation and strategic thinking. While she had been surviving day by day in her marriage, he had been quietly building a case that could protect her and Arya from Andrew's revenge. You want to fight for custody? Monica asked Andrew, her voice carrying a new edge of confidence. Go ahead. Explain to a judge why you abandoned your 9 months pregnant wife on a highway at night during a storm. Explain why you drove away laughing while she collapsed on the road. Explain why you didn't answer your phone when the hospital called to tell you she was in labor. Andrew's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, and Monica realized he had no defense for his actions because there was no defense. I can provide character witnesses, she continued, warming to her theme. The Supreme Court Justice who praised my legal work while you told me to be quiet. The senator who wanted my input on legislation while you said women should leave politics to men. The French ambassador who engaged me in policy discussion while you suggested I should focus on fashion. Stop, Andrew said weakly. The governor who sought my advice on education reform while you claimed I was embarrassing myself by having opinions. Monica stood up, still holding Arya, and for the first time in 3 years felt the full power of her own presence. I can fill a courtroom with people who will testify that you systematically diminished and controlled me, culminating in an act of such cruelty that it endangered both your wife and unborn child. Andrew stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, and Monica realized that perhaps he was. For years, she had been diminished by his treatment, had allowed herself to become smaller to accommodate his insecurities. Now, standing in her full power, with her daughter in her arms and a man beside her who saw her strength as something to celebrate rather than suppress. She felt like herself again. "You can't take her from me," Andrew whispered. And for the first time, he sounded less like a threat and more like a plea. Monica felt a moment of unexpected sympathy for this broken man who had confused possession with love, control with care. But that sympathy was tempered by her responsibility to her daughter and her own future happiness. "I'm not taking her from you, Andrew. You gave her up the night you drove away and left us both to die." As Andrew stared at the woman he had tried so hard to possess and diminish, he finally saw what Hans had recognized from the beginning. Monica Sinclair Clark was not a prize to be won or a possession to be owned. She was a force of nature who had been temporarily contained but never truly conquered. And now that she had remembered her own power, she was absolutely magnificent to behold. Chapter 8. The Fortress of Truth. Some men built empires to prove their worth, but the wisest men learned that true power came from building others up rather than tearing them down. And Andrew Clark was about to receive a masterclass in the difference between strength and cruelty. The silence that followed Monica's declaration stretched between them like a chasm that could not be bridged by apologies or excuses. Andrew stood in the center of the medical suite, looking lost and diminished, his expensive suit unable to disguise the fact that he was a man whose world had crumbled around him in less than a week. Hans moved closer to Monica, not intrusively, but positioning himself as a silent reminder that she was not alone in this confrontation. Aurea slept peacefully in her mother's arms, oblivious to the battle being fought for her future, her tiny presence serving as both Monica's motivation and her source of strength. "Monica." Andrew tried again, his voice carrying a note of desperation that was entirely new. "Please be reasonable. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling, fix what's broken between us. Think about Arya. Doesn't she deserve to grow up with a real father?" Monica looked at Andrew with something that might have been pity. Her real father? The man who called her worthless for being born female? The man who refused to hold her because she wasn't the male heir he wanted? The man who wasn't even present for her birth because he was too busy drowning his disappointment in alcohol? "I was shocked, overwhelmed," Andrew protested weakly. "First-time fathers often react poorly to unexpected situations." "There was nothing unexpected about your daughter's gender," Monica replied coolly. "We've known she was a girl for 5 months. You had plenty of time to adjust your expectations, and instead, you chose to treat her birth as a personal failure." Hans cleared his throat softly, drawing Andrew's attention. "Perhaps this would be a good time to discuss the practical realities of your situation, Mr. Clark." Andrew turned to Hans with suspicion and barely contained hatred. "What practical realities?" Hans moved to a side table and retrieved a thick manila folder, which he opened with deliberate precision. "As of yesterday afternoon, the FBI has formally opened an investigation into your business practices. The SEC has frozen assets totaling $1.2 billion pending examination of your accounting records, and the IRS has flagged 12 offshore accounts for potential tax evasion." Monica watched Andrew's face cycle through denial, disbelief, and growing horror as Hans continued his methodical recitation. "The Pemberton deal you thought you had successfully hidden. The investigators have already traced the shell companies you used to launder the bribes. The Cayman Islands accounts, frozen as of this morning. The Manhattan penthouse you purchased with what appear to be illegally obtained funds, currently being valued for potential seizure." "You can't have access to that information," Andrew whispered, but his protest lacked conviction. "I have access to whatever information I need to protect the people I care about," Hans replied simply. "And right now, that includes ensuring that you understand the reality of your situation clearly enough to make rational decisions about your future." Monica realized she was witnessing the systematic destruction of a man's entire existence. And while part of her felt horrified by the thoroughness of Hans's preparation, another part of her marveled at the strategic brilliance of it. Hans had not simply fallen in love with her, he had prepared for war against the man who was hurting her. "How long have you been planning this?" Andrew asked, his voice hollow with shock. "I've been documenting your criminal activities since the day I realized Monica was trapped in an abusive marriage with no way to safely escape." Hans answered without hesitation. "Every illegal transaction, every bribe, every tax dodge, all carefully recorded and verified." Andrew's legs seemed to give out, and he sank into a chair with the boneless collapse of a man whose world had just exploded around him. "Why? What did I ever do to you personally?" Hans's expression hardened, and Monica saw a glimpse of the ruthless businessman who had built and maintained a $12 billion empire. "You hurt her," Hans said simply. "You took an extraordinary woman and systematically destroyed her confidence, her joy, her sense of self-worth. You treated her like property instead of a partner, like a decoration instead of a human being with thoughts and dreams and desires of her own." "I loved her," Andrew protested desperately. "You possessed her," Hans corrected coldly. "Love builds people up. Love celebrates their achievements. Love protects them from harm. What you practiced was ownership, control, and ultimately, abuse." Monica felt tears prick at her eyes as she listened to Hans articulate feelings she had struggled to understand during 3 years of increasingly toxic marriage. She had known something was wrong, had felt her spirit withering under Andrew's treatment, but his gaslighting had made her question her own perceptions. "Andrew," she said quietly, drawing his attention back to her, "do you remember the last time you celebrated one of my achievements? The last time you seemed genuinely happy about my success?" Andrew opened his mouth to answer, then closed it as he apparently realized he couldn't remember any such instance. "Do you remember the last time you asked about my feelings? My dreams, what I wanted for our future together?" Again, silence. "Do you remember the last time you made love to me instead of simply taking what you wanted?" Andrew's face crumpled, and Monica saw him finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had destroyed through his selfishness and insecurity. "I can change," he whispered. "I can be better. Give me another chance, please." Monica looked down at Arya, who chose that moment to open her dark eyes and gaze up at her mother with the trusting innocence that only babies possessed. Everything Monica did going forward would be measured against the question of what was best for this small person who depended on her completely. "The problem isn't whether you can change, Andrew," she said gently. "The problem is that I've changed. I've remembered who I am when I'm not walking on eggshells, trying not to threaten your ego. I've remembered what it feels like to be valued for my mind, respected for my opinions, cared for without conditions or expectations. Because of him," Andrew said bitterly, gesturing toward Hans. "Because of my daughter," Monica corrected firmly. "Because becoming a mother reminded me that I want to raise a girl who knows her own worth, who never accepts being diminished by someone who claims to love her." Hans stepped forward, his voice gentle but implacable. "Andrew, you have a choice to make. You can fight this, try to drag Monica through a custody battle that will cost both of you enormous amounts of money and emotional energy while your criminal issues are being prosecuted. Or you can accept reality and focus on dealing with your legal problems while allowing Monica and Arya to rebuild their lives in peace." "And if I choose to fight?" Anne's smile was sharp as a blade. "Then every embarrassing detail of your business practices, your treatment of your wife, and your abandonment of your pregnant family will become public record. Every newspaper, every tabloid, every gossip blog will have access to documentation of exactly what kind of man you really are." Monica saw Andrew weigh his options, watching his face cycle through rage, desperation, And finally, a kind of broken resignation. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. "Sign divorce papers that give Monica full custody and generous financial support," Hans said matter-of-factly. "Accept a plea bargain with federal prosecutors that minimizes your prison time. Disappear from our lives permanently, and in return, your cooperation with authorities is noted favorably. Your criminal activities are portrayed as the actions of a desperate man rather than a calculating predator, and you retain enough assets to live comfortably once your legal obligations are met." Monica listened to this negotiation with fascination and growing relief. Hans had not simply prepared to rescue her, he had prepared to give her a complete, clean escape from a life that had been slowly killing her spirit. "I need time to think," Andrew said weakly. "You have until tomorrow morning," Hans replied. "After that, I release everything to federal authorities without conditions, and you face the full consequences of your actions." Andrew stood up unsteadily, his movements those of a man who had aged years in the space of hours. He looked at Monica one last time, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been genuine regret. "I did love you," he said quietly. "I just didn't know how to love you properly." Monica felt her heart squeeze with unexpected compassion. "I know you did in your way. But your way of loving was slowly destroying me, and I can't let that happen to our daughter." Andrew nodded slowly, then turned and walked out of the room without another word. The sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway seemed to carry with it the last remnants of Monica's old life. Hans closed the folder and set it aside, then turned to Monica with an expression of concern and gentle inquiry. "Are you all right?" he asked. Monica considered the question seriously. She had just watched the complete destruction of her husband's life and empire. She had confronted the man who had controlled and diminished her for 3 years. She had claimed her daughter's future and her own freedom in the space of a single conversation. "I'm better than all right," she said finally, surprised by the truth of it. "I'm free." Arya chose that moment to make a small sound of contentment, and Monica realized her daughter had slept peacefully through the entire confrontation, safe in her mother's arms and surrounded by people who would protect her from the storms of the world. "What happens now?" Monica asked. Hans moved closer, his expression hopeful but carefully respectful. "Now you rest and recover and decide what you want your new life to look like. Everything is possible, Monica, everything." As Monica sat in the golden afternoon light, holding her daughter and looking into the eyes of a man who had moved mountains to set her free, she realized that sometimes the end of one story was just the beginning of something infinitely more beautiful, and she was finally ready to write her own happy ending. Chapter 9: The Phoenix Rises. Freedom was not a destination but a daily choice, and Monica Sinclair Clarke was about to discover that the most beautiful thing about breaking chains was not the relief of their absence, but the incredible lightness of remembering how to fly. 6 weeks had passed since Andrew's world collapsed around him. 6 weeks during which Monica had slowly emerged from the protective cocoon of Hans's medical facility into a larger world that seemed full of possibilities she had forgotten existed. She stood now in the sunlit nursery of Hans's Bavarian castle, watching Arya sleep peacefully in a crib carved from wood so old and beautiful it seemed like something from a fairy tale. The castle itself was a revelation, not the cold, imposing fortress Monica had imagined when Hans first mentioned it, but a warm, living space where centuries of family history blended seamlessly with modern comfort. Ancient tapestries hung beside contemporary art, and medieval stone walls housed state-of-the-art technology that ran the estate with invisible efficiency. "She's grown so much," Hans observed softly, joining Monica at the cribside. Over the weeks of recovery, he had become a constant, gentle presence in their lives, never presuming, always supportive, treating Arya with the devotion of someone who had already claimed her as his own. "She has," Monica agreed, reaching down to adjust the baby's blanket. Sometimes I look at her and can barely believe she's real, that she's mine. Yours and perfect in every way, Hans said, his voice carrying the warmth that had become as familiar to Monica as her own heartbeat. Monica turned from the crib to look out the tall windows that offered a breathtaking view of the Bavarian Alps. Snow-capped peaks rose against a sky so blue it seemed painted, and the sight filled her with a peace she hadn't experienced since childhood. Here, surrounded by beauty and safety, she had begun to remember who she was beneath the layers of fear and diminishment that her marriage had wrapped around her soul. "Hans," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made him turn toward her with immediate attention, "we need to talk about the future." She saw something flicker in his eyes, hope mixed with apprehension, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "Of course, whatever you need to discuss." Monica moved to the window seat, settling herself on cushions that had been positioned to take advantage of the spectacular view. Hans followed, sitting at a respectful distance that somehow managed to feel both considerate and intimate. "Andrew signed the papers yesterday," she began. "Full custody to me, generous financial support, and a complete relinquishment of any claim to visitation or involvement in Arya's life. How do you feel about that?" Monica considered the question carefully. "Relieved, sad, grateful, it's complicated." She paused, watching clouds drift past the mountain peaks. "Part of me feels guilty that Arya will grow up without knowing her biological father. And the other part? The other part knows that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a child is protect them from people who would damage their sense of self-worth." Monica turned to face Hans directly. "You've shown me what it looks like when someone loves, without trying to control, supports, without trying to diminish. I want Arya to grow up expecting that kind of treatment from everyone in her life." Hans was quiet for a moment, and Monica could see him processing the implications of her words. "Monica," he said carefully, "I need you to know that I don't expect anything from you. The help I've provided, the protection, the resources, they all came with no strings attached. You don't owe me anything, and you shouldn't feel pressured to make decisions about our relationship based on gratitude." Monica felt her heart squeeze at his consideration, so different from Andrew's constant expectations and demands. What if it's not about gratitude? What if it's about choice? Hans's breath caught slightly. What kind of choice? Monica stood up and moved to the window, gathering her thoughts as she watched eagles soar between the mountain peaks. For weeks, she had been processing her feelings, trying to separate genuine attraction from the relief of being rescued, working to understand what she truly wanted, rather than what she thought she should want. 6 months ago, I was dying inside my marriage, she said quietly. Not dramatically, not obviously, but slowly and surely. Every day I became a little smaller, a little quieter, a little less myself. I thought that was what love required, sacrifice and compromise, and endless accommodation of someone else's insecurities. That's not love, Hans said firmly. That's abuse disguised as devotion. I know that now, but I didn't know it then because it happened gradually. Like a frog in slowly boiling water, I didn't realize I was dying until I was almost gone. Monica turned to face him, her dark eyes bright with unshed tears. Do you know what saved me? Arya? Monica shook her head. You, not the rescue. Not the wealth or the protection or the grand gestures. You saved me by seeing me as worthy of service rather than demanding that I serve. You showed me what it looked like when someone loved me enough to become smaller so I could become larger. Hans stood up, his movements careful and deliberate. Monica, let me finish, she interrupted gently. I need to say this while I have the courage. He nodded. His full attention focused on her with an intensity that was both flattering and slightly overwhelming. These past 6 weeks, living in your home, watching you interact with Arya, seeing how you handle your business and treat your staff and move through the world, I've fallen in love with you. Not because you rescued me, not because you're rich or powerful or can give us security. I've fallen in love with your kindness, your integrity, your ability to be strong without being dominating. Hans's face transformed, hope and joy, and something deeper blazing in his eyes. "Monica, I'm not finished," she said, holding up a hand to stop him. "I've fallen in love with you, but I need you to understand that I'm not the same woman who needed rescuing. I've remembered who I am, what I'm capable of, what I deserve. If we do this, if we become a family, it won't be because I need you to complete me. It will be because I choose to build something beautiful with you as a complete person partnering with another complete person." Hans moved closer, his movements slow and careful, as if he were approaching something precious that might disappear if he moved too quickly. "Are you proposing to me, Monica Sinclair?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of wonder that made Monica's heart skip. "I'm proposing that we stop pretending we're just friends," she replied, her own voice catching slightly. "I'm proposing that we acknowledge what's been growing between us and see where it leads." Hans reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and gently cupped her face in his hands. His touch was warm and sure, carrying none of the possessiveness that had characterized Andrew's physical affection. "I have loved you since the first moment I saw you," he said quietly. "I will love you for the rest of my life, whether you choose me or not. But if you're willing to try building something together, I promise you that every day I will work to deserve the gift of your trust." Monica leaned into his touch, feeling safe and cherished and powerful all at the same time. "Then stop asking my permission and kiss me," she whispered. Hans's smile was radiant as he leaned down to press his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle and reverent, full of months of restrained longing and careful respect. Monica felt something inside her chest open like a flower turning toward the sun, and she realized this was what it felt like to be loved properly, not possessed, not controlled, but celebrated and cherished and supported in becoming the fullest version of herself. From the crib across the room, Arya made a soft sound of contentment, as if she approved of this new development in her small world. "What happens now?" Monica asked against Hans's lips. "Now we figure out how to blend our lives together," Hans replied, resting his forehead against hers. "Your career, my business, Arya's future, our hopes and dreams, and the million small decisions that make up a shared life." Monica smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I have some thoughts about that. Tell me everything." "Well, first, I want to go back to practicing law. I've been thinking about starting a foundation that provides legal services to women escaping abusive situations. I have some experience with that now." Hans's eyes lit up with admiration and pride. "That's brilliant. We could fund it through the Martin Foundation, give it real resources and reach. Second, I want Arya to grow up bilingual. She should know German as well as English, and she should understand her heritage from both sides of her family. She'll spend summers here in Bavaria learning about the mountains and the history, and winters in New York learning about skyscrapers and ambition. And third," Monica said, her voice carrying a note of mischief, "I want to plan a wedding that's nothing like the cold, calculated affair Andrew and I had. I want flowers and music and dancing and pure joy." Hans swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the nursery while she laughed with delight. "I want whatever makes you happy," he said, setting her down gently. "A cathedral with 1,000 guests, or a garden with just us and Arya, a year of planning or tomorrow morning. Whatever you want, whenever you're ready." Monica looked into his eyes and saw her future reflected there, not as someone else's accessory or possession, but as a partner in building something beautiful and lasting. "I'm ready now," she said simply. "I'm ready to choose love over fear, partnership over possession, joy over security." From her crib, Arya gurgled happily. And Monica realized her daughter would grow up watching a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection, learning from her mother's example that love should lift you up rather than tear you down. As Hans kissed her again under the Bavarian sun while their daughter cooed approval from her fairy tale crib, Monica Sinclair Clark understood that sometimes the greatest adventure was not being rescued by a prince, but discovering that you had always been a queen and choosing to share your kingdom with someone worthy of your crown. Chapter 10. The Crown of Love. True love stories did not end with rescue or riches, but began with two complete souls, choosing daily to build something greater than either could create alone. And as Monica Sinclair prepared to marry Hans Martin, she understood that the greatest magic was not the transformation of rags to riches, but the alchemy of two hearts becoming one while remaining wholly themselves. The garden wedding was everything Monica had dreamed of during her years of suffocating in Andrew's cold world. White roses climbed ancient stone walls, their fragrance mixing with the mountain air to create something that smelled like pure joy. 200 guests sat in chairs arranged on emerald grass, but Monica barely saw them. Her entire focus was on Hans, who stood at the altar, looking like he could hardly believe his good fortune. Monica walked down the aisle, wearing silk that flowed around her like liquid moonlight, her dark skin glowing against the white fabric. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Arya had helped choose that morning by grabbing enthusiastically at every bloom they showed her. The baby now sat in the front row with Hans's sister, babbling happily at the proceedings as if she understood that something wonderful was happening. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying across the garden with warm authority, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have found in each other not completion, but amplification, the ability to become more fully themselves through the mirror of true love." Monica met Hans's eyes and felt the familiar flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with nervousness and everything to do with the pure joy of choosing this man, this life, this future together. 6 months ago, she'd been dying inside a marriage built on control and possession. Today, she was marrying a man who celebrated her strength rather than fearing it. "Monica," the minister continued, "do you take Hans to be your husband? To love and honor, to support and cherish, to walk alongside as an equal partner in all of life's adventures?" Monica's voice rang clear across the garden. "I do, with my whole heart, completely, freely, joyfully and forever." "Hans, do you take Monica to be your wife? To love and honor, to support and cherish, to walk alongside as an equal partner in all of life's adventures?" "I do," Hans replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to spend every day of my life proving worthy of the gift of her love." As they exchanged rings, simple bands of platinum engraved with words of love in 3 languages, Monica was aware of movement at the back of the garden. She glanced over Hans's shoulder and felt her breath catch. Andrew stood behind the last row of chairs, partially hidden by an ancient oak tree. He looked terrible, thin, haggard, wearing a suit that had seen better days. His legal troubles had played out exactly as Hans had predicted, resulting in bankruptcy, prison time, and the complete destruction of everything he had once thought defined him. For a moment, Monica felt her old fear rise in her throat, but then Hans squeezed her hands gently, drawing her attention back to his face, and she realized something profound had shifted. Andrew no longer had the power to frighten her. He was simply a broken man who had lost everything through his own choices, watching the woman he had failed to love properly choose someone who knew how to love her right. "You may kiss your bride," the minister announced. Hans kissed Monica with all the reverence of a man who had waited his entire life for this moment. And Monica kissed him back with the joy of a woman who had finally found her home. The garden erupted in applause and cheers, but all Monica could hear was her own heart singing with happiness. As they turned to face their guests as husband and wife, Monica glanced once more toward the oak tree. Andrew was still there, and in the late afternoon sunlight she could see tears streaming down his face. He raised one hand in what might have been a gesture of farewell or blessing, then turned and walked away through the trees. Monica felt a moment of unexpected sadness for the man Andrew might have been if he had learned to love without controlling, to support without diminishing. But that sadness was overwhelmed by gratitude for the man beside her, who had shown her what real love looked like. The reception flowed seamlessly from ceremony to celebration. Tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by chefs who understood that a wedding feast should nourish both body and soul. A string quartet played, while guests talked and laughed and toasted the bride and groom with champagne that tasted like liquid sunshine. Monica danced her first dance, as Hans's wife, to music that seemed to have been composed specifically for this moment. This garden, this perfect convergence of two lives choosing to become one. Hans held her with careful reverence, his touch communicating love and respect and the promise of a lifetime of such moments. "Are you happy?" he whispered against her ear as they swayed to the music. Monica looked around at the garden filled with people celebrating their love, at Arya sleeping peacefully in her godmother's arms, at the mountains rising beyond the castle walls like ancient guardians of their happiness. "I'm more than happy," she whispered back. "I'm home." As the evening progressed, Monica found herself surrounded by well-wishers and friends. But her favorite moment came when she stepped away from the crowd to nurse Arya in the quiet privacy of the castle's library. Hans found her there, sitting in a leather chair beside a window that overlooked their wedding garden. "How's our daughter?" he asked, settling into the chair beside them. Monica looked up at him with wonder. "Our daughter? I love the sound of that. She's going to grow up thinking fairy tales are real," Hans observed, gently stroking Arya's tiny hand as she nursed. "Maybe they are," Monica replied. "Maybe fairy tales are just stories about people who refuse to settle for less than they deserve, who have the courage to choose love over fear." Hans leaned over to kiss Monica's forehead, then Arya's. "In that case, we're living in the very best kind of fairy tale." Through the library window, Monica could see their guests still celebrating in the garden, their laughter and joy creating a soundtrack for the beginning of their new life together. Tomorrow, they would return to the real world of Hans's business empire and Monica's legal foundation, of raising a daughter and building a marriage and navigating all the beautiful complexities of a shared life. But tonight, in the golden glow of their wedding celebration, with her husband beside her and her daughter in her arms, Monica Sinclair Martin knew that sometimes the most powerful magic in the universe was simply having the courage to choose love and finding someone who chose to love you back with the same fierce devotion. Outside in the garden, beneath the same oak tree where Andrew had stood, watching the woman he lost marry the man who knew how to love her, a single white rose bloomed out of season, as if nature itself wanted to add its blessing to a love story that had begun with storms and ended with sunshine, proving that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grew from the deepest darkness. The fairy tale was complete, but the real story, the daily choice to love and honor and cherish, was just beginning. The end.